Joining us now on Practical 365 from Microsoft, it is André Lutermann. Hi, André. Welcome to the show.
Welcome. Thanks for having me, Steve and Bastiaan.
And it's been a couple of years nearly since I last saw you. So was it 2023 where we met doing tech roadshow across Europe over a few days?
Exactly. We had a long conversation about what was going on in the identity area.
Yes. And I do remember, obviously, I watched it was the keynote, wasn't it, at each venue. And
Yep.
so I remember in Paris and in Frankfurt, of course, listening to you talk in depth about how quickly an Active Directory could be compromised and how everybody's got multiple cloud providers, how within effectively minutes, all of these other things could be compromised if they compromise your Active Directory, right? And we're going to talk a bit more about what's changed since then. But before we dive into it, for those that don't know you or I've seen you talk with tech and so on, do you want to tell us a little bit more about what you do at Microsoft?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a senior technologist for cybersecurity. So I'm typically technical advisor to customers on how they should secure their operations to a certain degree on-prem, but also hybrid and multi-cloud. Yeah, and how to actually do security operations around them. So actually monitoring the environment for any unusual or suspicious activity and how to react to that.
And is that usually working with enterprise customers, their architects teams, or CTOs teams, CISOs, and so on?
Exactly. So I'm also talking to the C-level audience to a certain degree and directly working also with the SOC teams and the administrators around that.
So kind of a bridge between solving the problems, but also a bit of a weighty voice in talking to the execs at some of your biggest customers to say, this is why this is something that you really need to deal with.
Yeah, so I used to work for a certain time in incident response as well, but I also have a complete, more or less, Microsoft history.
Yeah.
But I'm also home, or I feel home on the other operating systems as well. I used to do some forensic works and building some of the security operations centers for large-scale customers. Yeah, with the change towards hybrid and cloud, there are new things to learn for those organizations. There's some culture change with that.
So, do you think that these organizations have deficits by default? I mean, cybersecurity has been around in most of the industries for the last 25 years, really. That's, with the onset of firewalls and the external boundaries. And of course, now everything has gotten so much more sophisticated. When you speak to your customers, what are the questions and kind of the deficits that they are dealing with and challenges that they are trying to have you come and solve?
So one of the main challenges could be that the organization itself is not prepared yet for cloud adoption, at least for the security operation part of that. But at least a lot of organizations are doing good in this realm. And those organizations more struggle with too much noise from different security systems and actually stitching it together to a complete picture where it started, where it ended, and how far is the attacker come and how can we get them out quickly.
In general, this is basically the growth that has been happening through the different logging monitoring systems that organizations have put in place over the years. But how can they get useful information potentially still out of the systems that are in place and potentially enhance their security posture with the solutions that you're actually talking about?
Yeah, one of the greatest frictions that come with this kind of approach typically are integrating the different systems into a complete picture. So getting a holistic picture of what's going on. And if you can easily understand what really happens, so actually what are the different systems telling you and what should you make out of it and how to react to something like that, then you are in a good area. The problem is those integration works typically took more time than actually responding to those threats. Okay. And it's an ongoing effort to do something like that. So if there's some technology or good approach to do it to ease this kind of integration work, then you have more time actually spending on the real problem.
Now, with these systems that you have in place and seeing what is out there over the last couple of years, there have been a lot of incidents happening. What are kind of the most common situations when it comes to authentication or technologies that you would advise customers take a look at, potentially to enhance what they already have with the different systems within the organization?
So it's actually two things that I would start with before we can go to a technology discussion to a certain degree. One is actually know your assets. And we see that more than 90% of all breaches that happen come from some kind of an unmanaged asset first, and then pivoting into the real organization to a certain degree. So you can't protect what you don't know of or know about to a certain degree. And then doing the basic rights, the basics rights to a certain degree. For example, securing your on-prem Active Directory is still one of the main vectors. And easy opening or easy misconfiguration in that regard, or not knowing what to look for if there's anything going wrong. That's one of the main problems where it started from. So the final goal of any attacker is actually to take over valid accounts and move laterally with valid credentials. You can do things about that if you don't know what to look for and if you won't harden it correctly.
I guess with Active Directory, it must be near or nigh on impossible for some organisations really to get a handle on it, because you might have identity specialists today who were born, if they're early 20s, they could be born after Active Directory was implemented in the organisation, right?
Yeah.
Which sounds like, I can look on the internet and find, because I worked at university, stuff on the internet, I can find the original plans on archive.org for an Active Directory that I put in 23 years ago. And I know that is almost certainly still there. But, gosh, you if you're working in a big organisation, how do you get on top of that?
Yeah, so most of the organizations already integrate something like an enterprise access model, the typical tiering model that you were talking about in the past. That was called Red Forest concept beforehand, now extended to a hybrid operation, changed a little. And how we can do that. Also, administration access, for example, over a privileged access workstation or something like that should be standard in larger organizations at least. I understand that smaller organizations just can't do the same efforts or do the same level of separation to a certain degree. But yeah, that has changed. At least some of them have done things like that very professionally. In smaller organizations, it's very important that they do hardening of the Active Directory, because they do some kind of misconfiguration and open up ports and they don't know what's happening there. So understanding your posture in Active Directory. So there are tools from Microsoft to do that, but there are also lots of third-party tools around that can do it even easier or ease your job to a certain degree. That's one of the main things to take into account.
And do you see, certainly across the market, that people are moving away from Active Directory for on-prem and moving to the cloud? Because in a way, if it's a security conversation with the execs, then picking SaaS solutions to replace on-premises solutions isn't really a technology decision. It becomes a risk decision, right?
Yeah. So we see a lot of organizations actually adopting Entra ID for their user interactions for any kind of application. So moving out the end user from Active Directory, but there is still in any kind of production environment, so manufacturing, for example, or anything, an organization that does something on-prem, there is a need for an on-prem Active Directory anyway. So we completely realize and also recognize that there is some Active Directories here to stay.
Yeah,
to a certain degree.
I built 2 domain controllers yesterday for an article I'm writing for Practical 365. But it did remind me that, we did a company tenant migration a few years ago. This is actually not massively uncommon, but the vSphere bit reminded me that the first thing we did need to build was the Active Directory, even though all users were going to be Entra ID using cloud IDs, basically. Again, but some, if not all, sync back to an Active Directory that they'd never directly log into.
Yeah, there will be legacy applications and also on-prem environments that still will completely need an Active Directory, no question about that. I think that the normal information worker, though, is more using Entra ID to do something like that, and also using his SaaS application and multi-cloud environments and things like that. There's an easier way to do that, and also to harden and protect those accounts. Also, ease of operation to a certain degree from a user and from an admin perspective, I would say. The thing is here, we just recently, so in end of last year, we activated all these multi-factor prerequisites for all the accounts. And we still see customers that are disabling something like that, even for users that may be feasible to do something like that. So that's a risky move. So what we can see from our own telemetry, when we spoke in 2023, we had like 3,500 password brute forcing attacks a second. Now we are up to more than 7,000 right now. So that has increased. This kind of possibility has increased. So if you're using authentication methods with just username password, I think we are in 2025 right now. Maybe you should think about that. And there's better ways to do that.
But so go on, Steve.
Is that something that's organically grown, or is there any changes of adoption of technology by people behind some of these threats that have multiplied that? Did it jump up in terms of those numbers, or has it just been steadily growing?
No, I think it's still an easy one if you just do some kind of the password spray attacks on accounts, if you know some of those accounts, because still like a password like February 2025 extension mark or something like that, that is still a possibility to hack into a company if they don't care about what they are doing things like conditional access, having some kind of multi-factor environment and things like that. We saw some of the multi-factor fatigue attacks, so actually spamming users for multi-factor things. That's something we are now handling differently. For example, with things like the authenticator and how it works, it will actually toggle down those requests to a certain degree if they are not coming from the user itself and himself or herself. But yeah, they are not yet finished what they do. So we see good adoption rates in any kind of multi-factor scenario. We see phishing resistant credentials to be adopted, like things like Windows Hello for Business, things like FIDO keys or the passkeys right now, for example, for some of the web applications on a third-party basis, for example. But there are still organizations that haven't any kind of multi-factor authentication in place for users.
But you mentioned something very interesting, passkeys. So, if you look at any cybersecurity magazine or any article on the internet, people are talking about passkeys. Can you kind of allude a bit to the people that might not know what are passkeys and why are they so interesting, and should people potentially consider implementing them?
Passkeys is a way actually exchanging authentication requests to a certain degree with a secret that is stored just on your own machine or your mobile device or something like that, and it's unique for your machine and your identity. And you can then log into any kind of web application with that requests some kind of a challenge, and you will give the answer with your secret, but the public ID or the public service in this case is just getting something like a public key response to that. And the good thing here is, to a certain degree, passkeys provide a more secure and a convenient method to logging into websites and applications compared to passwords. And unlike passwords, which users must remember and type, passkeys are stored as secrets on a device and can use devices unlock mechanisms, such as biometrics, for example, like Windows Hello or the Windows Hello PIN, things like that. Passkeys can be used without the need for other sign-in challenges, making the authentication process faster and more convenient to users.
So conceptually, it's similar to perhaps something you could do 20 years ago on Windows 2000 XP. Create a key, or certificate services would issue a user a key or sign the key, and then they can then present the public. The other side, it's really just a similar sort of set of concepts to what people have been doing. Obviously, the adoption of technologies like that was very, very difficult for organizations to implement, and even when it was public-private key encryption,
yes, it's very similar.
It wasn't super compatible across it, and people used other solutions like GPG as well.
Yeah, it's similar to that. It's stored in the trusted platform module on the device. If it's a mobile or if it's a laptop or something like that, that's working fine. So it's also authenticating the device to a certain degree, and you can't take it out of the device. So an attacker as well can't take it away and do something with your passkey on his device or something like that. It doesn't work that way. I'm just saying, for typical SaaS apps or something like that, Entra ID, so just from the Entra ID gallery, you can actually choose a single sign-on method that is also secured by things like FIDO or as well. Windows Hello for Business, that would be an easier way as well. It's just for the applications where you don't have that and still using username and password. Why not use passkeys instead?
So we spoke on the podcast to Rod Trent about Security Copilot, and he gave us the rundown a while back on exactly what that is. Be interested to know though, because you know working directly with quite a lot of larger customers who are close to Microsoft, which often means that they, with that close relationship, have confidence to go ahead and deploy and be early adopters, at scale. I'm wondering whether you're seeing Security Copilot being used in the market by your customers, and how are they getting on with it?
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting because also Copilot, as a Security Copilot, has evolved and can do more things than it did before in last year, for example. So I already talked a little about the complexity of getting the different systems together into a complete picture.
Yeah.
And that's where you aren't an expert on all those different systems and all the different UIs to get the data together to actually understand what's happening sometimes. And Copilot for security, or Security Copilot in this case, can actually lower the barrier of entry to get to the data because you can just ask questions and they can be connected. Understanding where it happened, where it came from, but it can also give you advice on the eviction of the attacker. So there's something that we added recently that was called guided response, and actually giving you a complete way on what is to do next to get the attacker out of the environment. So for example, things like containing devices, suspending user accounts, for example, or sending them into a password reset cycle, or maybe also logging them off from certain services and things like that. So if somebody is taken over, for example, in a hands-on keyboard ransomware attack, so where actually the attacker sends something into the environment like a phishing email, and then somebody clicks on that, and they are actually interacting live with the system in the back. So not a ransomware that is sprayed throughout the whole world, but more targeted for a certain environment. So they are really exploring the target environment while they are interacting with the user and the endpoints and the systems behind that. And it's super interesting if you can stop such an attack just with the help of an AI, because you are understanding quicker what they are trying to do and how they want to pivot into the environment sometimes, or what you should change, for example, from your configuration as well, from a posture perspective, to get them to not be victim again, because then you can react quicker than the attacker can do. So you are actually, the main goal here is to shrink the time for response, I would say. If you understand quicker what doors to close to a certain degree, and then the attackers can actually open any other door, then you are in front of the attacker for the first time.
And with Security Copilot, it seems like it's something where Microsoft have solved somewhat of a technical challenge, because you pointed out earlier on that the problem with looking at logs is there's so much of it to go through that a team of people might struggle to create rule sets and filters to pull out the right things. But with Security Copilot, people can query a much larger set of data than they could if, I don't know, they went, without naming other third-party companies, but say they had a syslog server that was piping all of the logs in, and embedding them into an embedding database, and then allowing RAG to be searched against it, which would be, I suppose, conceptually how you might imagine Security Copilot would work. But it can't possibly work like that, because it must be far more complex to be able to accurately allow people to get those kind of insights, where if it's wrong, it would be potentially undermine the system, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing is more getting all the data together to a certain degree. That's something that we can do from a Microsoft side for XDR and Sentinel and things like that. But there could also be third-party teams in the mix anyway. But the most important thing is the integration of third-party data as well. And that's what we opened up during Ignite last year. So there were more than 50 vendors that provided their own plugins for Copilot for security. Think of them like a connector that you use, for example, for other ChatGPT-based services.
Yeah.
But you can easily write it yourself. It's just a little YAML file that you provide with. There's an API on the other side. It's not that complicated to connect. And then you can understand what it's doing from that, what it's presenting and how you can react on that.
I guess the big question, though, is if if to try and solve this problem yourself using common techniques of searching large sets of data and trying to get answers from it using large language models, if that's quite a hard problem, right? So given the amount of data that Security Copilot is tasked with answering, are you finding that customers are seeing that it is as effective as they hope? Or has it had to go through some iterations to get a little bit better? Were there any teething problems?
Yeah, so it's with large language model has the possibility to understand different data sources in a quicker and faster way than you can do it as a human. The problem with that is sometimes if there's shit in those services, there's something that is coming out is not that of the quality that you would like it. So it can just answer question from the data quality that is in the backend. And if you have a very aligned data model for all of that, or your basic data is okay, that's they get maximum value out of that. The question is more, sometimes you have to clean up a little bit on what your legacy, those homegrown things, to make the improvement overall. But that was a pain that the organization typically felt before already, because they had the same problems even without any kind of co-pilot.
Yeah.
But now the organizations have their assets, they have their incidents, all this information comes. What do you do? Is Security Copilot able to analyze that? How does it actually look at the difference between asset, incident, and correlate it?
Yeah. So the good thing is here that from our technology, you can actually correlate the different data between that, putting it, for example, like in systems like XDR or Sentinel. And we can give you more like a summary what's happening and also the different stages that the attacker may have run through and what assets are in scope, what users are in scope, what kind of data is in scope to a certain degree. But also understanding if you talk about assets, understanding the configuration, the posture of the assets, and how to improve on that. So giving you an action plan. Also, what is the aftermath of such an attack? So what are your to-dos to harden your environment?
And what are your recommendations there?
So my recommendation is actually understanding attack paths in your environment. That sounds complex. It sounds like a big thing. But actually for an MC65 customer that uses some of the Defender stuff as well, it's an easy one because that was also a free of charge add-on announced during Ignite. So we have something like an extended posture management functionality in there that doesn't give you just lists of misconfiguration and vulnerabilities and things like that in the environment, but actually shows you the choke points and attack passes that you should prioritize most. What that means is that you just have to change little things with big impact instead of patching thousands of vulnerabilities and misconfigurations. And it's clear that also those misconfiguration has to be handled to a certain degree, but you can actually ruin any kind of attack path just by changing some of the things. And that's better than just running the typical vulnerability management approach where you run through the long lists of not really prioritized vulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And just for those that miss it, so what's that specifically called then? And do you need a certain level of licensing to use it?
Yeah, it's typically open to any kind of MC65 E5 licensed user, but then it's coming as a free added value if you use any kind of the sensors from Microsoft, but you can also integrate third-party data into that. So the Microsoft functionality in the Microsoft realm is free, but in this functionality, if you want to add third-party data, so for example, your third-party vulnerability scanner like Rapid7, Tenable, Qualys, all those different functionalities in the world, you can do that. There's just a little cost from a data integration perspective. You have to store and put back and forth some data into the system. There's also third-party asset management databases that you can do. So your CMDB, integrate them with that and things like that, and all the other security sensors that you would like to integrate.
So that sounds like something that for relatively low cost, if you've got some of these other bits, then you can make a lot of impact then in the organization, as you said. But it does sound like it could be, the more you delve into it, quite a complex project on its own if you've got a lot of third-party integrations to set up.
Yeah, so the connector itself is not that complicated. Actually, getting the data from one side to the other, that's just shuffling around some data, not that complicated, actually. So it's an easy way to get all the data in one place and then understanding what the attack surface of your organization is. But it depends on what is best for you.
Yeah.
Do that, what helps you best. Just do it to a certain degree.
Well, yes. Now is all we've got time for on the show today. Are you going to be joining everyone at Tech Europe in a couple of months' time?
Yes, I will. Thanks for asking in this case. So I'm happy to be a presenter again on Tech Europe this year.
I'm looking forward to that, Andre.
Yes,
Spending a couple of days with you again. Yeah.
I was saying before we started the podcast how much I enjoyed last time I was in Germany with you, and how much I love German food. I've absolutely had a fantastic time when we last met, and you showed us some of the great places to eat. So obviously, if anyone's in Frankfurt and sees you over there, then you can point out the best places there too, can't you?
Looking forward to that.
But this time it's Dusseldorf, which is that your town, Bastiaan?
Yeah, well, yes. So I live near Düsseldorf, but of course Dutch national. So
Yeah.
but we start in London, and then we will travel to Paris, and then from Paris
Yes.
to Düsseldorf. So it's a 3-city tour again. Yeah, very excited to spend that time with Andre.
Fantastic. And thank you again for joining us. It's brilliant to have you on the show. And of course, thank you everyone at home or wherever you are for watching this and listening to this today.